Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Gabby. Today we're going to be doing one of my favorite videos to film every year, and that's going to be my worst books that I read in the year of 2023. And this is going to be another video that's part of my end of the year series. At the end of the year, I love to do videos for my most surprising books, my most disappointing, my worst, and my best. And these are going to be my worst books that I've read this year. You know, I don't like to be super negative on YouTube, but when you read about 200, like over 200 books in a year, which I have done this year, you tend to read a few stinkers, and so I figured this would be a good place for me to talk about them. I do want to put a disclaimer though on this video to say that this video is not to like make fun of anybody who enjoys these books. If you liked these books, I am so freaking happy for you. I never go into a book thinking that I'm gonna hate it, so I obviously wanted to love this, and if you did love it, then that's so great for you. I also wanted to say that this video is not for these authors, and if you are watching this and you're the author of one of these books, then I'm so sorry that this book didn't work for me personally. You know, in the entire year of 2023, I read over 200 books, and out of those 200, I only had 6 books that were 1-star reads for me, which I think is a pretty high success rate. You know, like, I didn't have too many books that I absolutely hated, but those 6 books are going to be featured on this list that I gave 1 star. I also have one book that I didn't end up rating at all on this list, and then I have another book that I gave 2 stars, but it just felt right that it should be included on this list. So without any further ado, let's jump into the worst books that I read this year. Why don't we begin with some books that I had for my own book club, the Book Troop? Because of course, I have 2 books for my own book club that ended up on this list. You know what's funny? I was thinking about why I have certain books for my own book club that always end up on my worst of the year list, and I think it's because when I'm reading books for my book club, I am forcing myself to finish a book that I probably otherwise would have DNF'd, right? So I think it makes sense that sometimes these books will end up on my worst of the year list. But anyways, all of that to say, the first book that's on my worst books of this year is Midnight is the Darkest Hour by Ashley Winstead. And I could not be more upset about the fact that this book is on this list, because I had such high hopes for this book because I've loved and given a 5-star to Ashley Winstead before, and because Ashley Winstead is such a cool human, and this makes me really sad, you know, because she's really active on Instagram and she's so sweet in the book community, and I feel terrible for putting this on my list, but I could not stand this book. I couldn't deal with it. I wanted to love this so badly, you know, because it sounded like something I could like. It's like small town. They talk about this creature thing that's like the low man that sounds kind of like a vampire. Like, I don't know, the way the town talked about this creature, it sounded so fascinating, but I feel like this book is not really about that at all. Like, it's really not. It just like mentions it like one time that there's this like lowman creature or whatever, and it's just never really brought up again in any interesting kind of way. The thing that annoyed me so much about this book though was the characters. We're following these characters named Ruth and then her best friend named Everett, and Ruth is this character who is just very obsessed with the book Twilight, which is not a bad thing. Like, if you like Twilight, I think that's super cool and I'm super happy for you. But also, the thing that annoyed me about this was how often Twilight was brought up and mentioned. It's almost like this book was like Twilight fanfiction. Like, it was literally brought up like every other page. She started to make a lot of like comparisons to Twilight in her own life. Like, she just like projected everything in her life to be like about Twilight, which was really kind of annoying. The characters just in general, like, there's this romance that's going on between her and Everett during this entire book. This book is so romance heavy. I was bored to tears, especially because I don't really think that this book had any thrilling things going on in it. Like, this just did not read like a thriller to me at all. There was a lot of religious themes in this book, which again, I don't mind the religious themes, but I just personally don't love reading about religion in my thriller or horror books because I'm not a religious person myself, so I just don't really care about that. And it's not like the religious themes were done poorly or anything like that. I just didn't care. And then the ending of this book, oh my gosh, the ending of this book is what solidified this book as one of my worst books of the year, because that ending, if we can even call that an ending, I don't know if I've ever been so like flabbergasted over the way that a book has ended before. I was just like, what do you mean? And so yeah, I did an entire live show kind of talking about my dislike for this book because it was one of my book club picks this year. So if you want to hear all of my spoilery thoughts about why this one didn't work for me, I will have the live show linked down below. But I know a lot of people really loved this one, and if you did, I'm so happy for you because I really wanted to love it, but it just did not work for me personally. Another huge disappointment this year from my own book club is A Twisted Love Story by Samantha Downing, which again, this is such a bummer that I didn't like this book because Samantha Downing is also a really cool person and she's so passionate in the book community, and I just really adore her as a human. So the fact that this made it onto my worst of the year list is pretty devastating for me. And this is a thriller book about this couple named Wes and Ivy. You know, I really should have gone into this book with different expectations, I suppose, because it's called A Twisted Love Story. Like, I should have known that the romance was gonna play such a huge part in this story and that the thriller elements were really gonna take a back seat. But I was just really looking forward to this one because I've enjoyed every single book that I've read from Samantha Downing so far, so I don't know what went wrong with this one. I think you might end up enjoying this one more if you're the kind of person who likes to read about a really toxic relationship and about these people who are clearly just so bad for each other and so toxic when they're together, but like they just keep coming back to each other and they just feed off of each other and they just need each other for whatever reason. And the only like real thrilling elements in this book is that at the beginning, Ivy thinks that she has a stalker, and so she gets this detective to start to look into like what's going on with her, and the detective falls deep into the history of this couple, Wes and Ivy, and the detective finds out about something that they could have been involved in like so many years ago, and it was just so boring because you also do read from the detective's point of view in this book, which also just felt so random. It's like the thrilling aspects of this book are things that happened years ago. Like, who even cares anymore? Like, we have moved past that, and it was just so unrealistic to me that a detective would look so much into this couple for like no real reason. Like, she didn't have any real reason to even look into them in the first place. It just felt so unrealistic. I guess my expectations for this book were just a little bit too high considering the fact that I've loved every book that I've read from this author so far before this one. Another one of my worst books of this year has got to be The Night House by Jo Nesbø. I could not be more sad about the fact that this book did not work for me. I read this one during Summerween. I was so freaking excited to read this one because not only is this cover absolutely stunning, like this is probably one of my favorite covers of 2023, and I know that's so shallow to say, but like these stunning book covers are so deceiving because this book was not fun. The premise of this one sounded pretty cool because it was going to be a horror novel where we follow this young boy and he's in like a phone booth with his friend when his little friend gets sucked into the phone, and then he has to try to explain to the police because this little boy goes missing, and he has to try to explain to the police that this little boy just got sucked into the phone and he can't explain it, and it was weird. And I thought that would sound like such a cool and interesting kind of fun premise, but oh my gosh, dude, reading from the perspective of this, like, I think he's like 12 to 14-year-old boy, absolutely not. He was so freaking annoying. And the thing that I hated about this that I wasn't expecting is that our main character, little boy, he's such a bully. Like, he's so mean. He was basically bullying this little kid when they were in the phone booth together, and he acts like they're friends, but they're not friends. He's a freaking bully. He's so mean to him. And I didn't like reading from the point of view of a little mean boy bully. And then this entire story is just about him trying to figure out what the fuck just happened to his little friend who got sucked into the phone. And like the police don't believe him because, you know, he's like a troubled kid and he's always like making up stories, I guess. And like, I don't know, I just didn't care. I didn't like reading from this protagonist's perspective. I just didn't care about anything that was going on in this story. And I just thought the writing was so bleak and so boring. There was like nothing about this book that really drew me in. Besides that opening scene, I guess. Like, the opening scene was pretty interesting, but then the rest of the book just falls completely flat. And maybe I'm just starting to think that maybe this author, Jo Nesbø, just is not for me, which is unfortunate. Because I did read the book, I think it was called The Snowman by Jo Nesbø, and that's supposed to be like one of his most critically acclaimed thrillers, and I did not like that one either. I think I gave that book 2 stars, but this one was definitely like even worse in my opinion. Like, this was just not great, and I think it was mainly due to the fact of the perspective we were reading from. I was really not a fan of this kid. It just made the book so annoying. It was insufferable. I didn't like it. It was a 1 star for me. I'm so sorry. I also ended up giving a 1 star to this book called The Chateau, which this one is a thriller that I read this year because I was reading this for my friend Savannah's book club, but this one sounded so intriguing, right? Because we're following these 4 women who have been friends for a long time, and they're going to be taking this vacation all together, and they have all of this history, and then there's all this like weird stuff that starts happening. Like, there's like a stalker kind of like Instagram account that's posting these like photos of them that are taken at angles where like it must be one of them. Like, it's kind of creepy. This one just had such a great premise, but oh my gosh, how did this book manage to be so boring and like also so over the top and dramatic at the same time? This book sounds like it would be a really cool thriller premise, but it honestly reads more like a romantic drama because there's just so much drama happening around these women's lives with their romances. It's like all of them are like sleeping with each other's husbands and they're all cheating, and it's just so boring. Like, I did not care about any of these women or any of these characters, and the romance subplots in this book were so heavy-handed that I just like, it felt more like a romance drama to me than a thriller. I also just thought there were too many characters in this book because we are following following from the perspectives of 4 different women. So you do get like 4 different point of views if I'm remembering correctly throughout the book. And I just didn't connect to any of the characters because there were just too many characters. Especially if I'm remembering correctly, there were 2 women that their point of views, like I could barely even tell them apart. Like they almost read exactly the same. And then I was already not really enjoying my time reading this, but by the ending of this book, oh my god, the ending! It just got so over the top and so dramatic, and I could just not give a fuck. Like there were no fucks given here. I'm so sorry. This one just did not work for me. Another one of my worst books that I read this year was the book You Shouldn't Have Come Here by Geneva Rose. And this one sounded like it could be pretty cool because in this story we're following from the perspective of this girl who rents this Airbnb, and she's gonna be going out there and staying there by herself, but what she doesn't realize is that the owner dude man is also gonna be like staying on the property with her, which is something that I think is really not cool. Like if you rent an Airbnb, you're expecting to like get the space to yourself, you know, but she doesn't realize that the guy is gonna be there. And this book has the audacity to call itself a thriller. There's so much romance in this book. Like this book is literally about this girl who gets this Airbnb and then starts to catch feelings for this man who's giving her every red flag and being so weird and creepy, but she's just like really into him for some reason. And so this is like a romance book between her and this man. And then there's even like a love triangle situation happening because he has this woman from his past that she gets all jealous of, and then like there's drama with her. It was just so incredibly boring. There was so much romance between these two, and not even that, but the romance was so cringy as hell because not only did they not have any chemistry, but also like he was so creepy. Like he was being so weird and giving off so many weird red flags, and she would just be like, oh my god, he's so quirky. I just could not stand these characters. I couldn't stand the book. I couldn't stand anything that I was reading. The only good thing I would say about this book is the fact that it's very readable. Like it's so easy to read. I finished it all within one day, but oh my gosh, it was just so ridiculous. And like the ending of this book, I was like, what? Because I saw so many people say, well, you know, just get to the ending because the ending has a really great twist and you won't see it coming. But I'm like, that's the ending twist that everybody's talking about? Like that's the twist. I feel like if you've read a lot of thrillers, you're probably gonna see the ending coming. I don't think it's anything crazy, but these characters were just the worst. I didn't give a shit about the romance. It was just not a fun time. So this one's definitely one of my worst of the year. I really just think it might be this author, Geneva Rose. I don't think that her style of thrillers are like meant for me, or like they're not my kind of thrillers, you know? Like her writing style definitely reminds me of kind of like Taryn Fisher with her thrillers, even though I do tend to prefer the thrillers from Taryn Fisher sometimes. But more often now, when these thrillers have such heavy like romantic things happening in them, like I just couldn't give a fuck. Like I just get so bored. And I do think that Geneva Rose, if I'm remembering correctly, I think she did have a book last year that ended up on my worst of the year list. So like clearly me and Geneva Rose, I just don't vibe with her thrillers. Another book that I'm so sad about that I had to give this book 1 star was The Drift by CJ Tudor. And once again, I'm sad about this because I think CJ Tudor is totally awesome. Like what a cool human. I've loved so many books from CJ Tudor before, and I think that's what makes it even more shocking when I end up hating a book as much as I do because I've previously loved a book from this author, so I'm like, what even happened? But this story, I thought it would be really cool. This book has a really like snowy atmosphere, which I thought would be really fun. It's almost like an apocalyptic type of book where you're not totally sure what's going on. The thing that was really difficult about this book for me is the fact that we're not only following from the perspective of 3 different characters, and there's like 3 different timelines that you're following, but in each one of the characters like point of views, there are so many characters that you have to like know the names of. Every character in their timeline has like 5 to 6 characters that they're hanging out with that like you need to memorize all these names, and then there's these characters, and then there's these ones, and it was so freaking confusing to read this book, especially because out of the 3 timelines that you're following, 2 of the timelines almost read exactly the same, and I was getting hella confused because in 2 of the timelines you're reading about characters who are like trapped in a car or like a train of some kind, if I'm remembering correctly, and then in the 3rd perspective you're reading about somebody who's like in a cabin or something. So like that one was easy to like differentiate because the location was very different, but the 2 perspectives when they're both like trapped in a car or a train of some kind, I was getting so confused. And if I'm remembering correctly, it was like they all had very similar names, so it was already just like so hard to tell the characters apart. So most of the time I spent the book feeling like confused, like wait, who am I reading from? And I kept having to like check back at the beginning of the chapter. I just hate books like this where there's so many characters that you just have no idea what's going on half the time. And then I also feel like for a premise of this kind, this book was so slow and it was so boring. In my opinion, it kind of read like a bad episode of The Walking Dead or something, you know? It's like one of those boring episodes where like it's just filler and nothing really happens. And there was supposed to be like a twist element to this book as well, and I just did not care. I was not surprised by anything that happened in this book. Like, it was just so bone dry, boring, bleak. I did not care. Like, nothing about the writing pulled me in with this one the way that it usually does with CJ Tudor. Like, I just didn't have anything positive to say about this book, and that's a freaking bummer because I really wanted to love this one. I really thought this could be right up my alley, but this one, unfortunately, this one did not work for me. The one book that I have on this list that I did give 2 stars to, but I think it would have to be included on my worst books of this year, is 19 Claws and a Blackbird. And this one is truly unfortunate because, you know, this is the same author as Tender is the Flesh, if you didn't know. And Tender is the Flesh is a horror book that I absolutely loved when I read it a few years ago. And this one I was really looking forward to because this is actually a collection of, I think it's 20 short horror stories, which, if you know me and my reading taste, I love reading short horror stories like this and horror novellas and like anything horror in like the short book format. I absolutely love it. Like, I eat that shit up. And so I was really looking forward to this because I was like, oh my gosh, like 20 short stories? Like, that is so exciting. Didn't like any of the stories. Like, I didn't like any of them. I think there was maybe one that I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting, but I don't think I rated any of them higher than like 3 stars. And it was just such a miss for me. It was such a missed opportunity. I feel like there was even some of the short stories in this collection that I ended up DNFing because they were so boring, even though none of them were that long. And then I also felt like there were some short stories in this collection that had such cool ideas. Like, there was so much potential there, but the writing was just so boring and mundane. I think there might have only been like 1 or 2 stories that I even think I enjoyed, and like even now I barely remember them. I mean, it's been a few months since I read this one, but I just remember feeling so devastated with how disappointed I was with this read. I do still think though, if this author came out with like a long novel in the future, like something more full length like Tender is the Flesh, I would still read books from this author in the future. But for some reason, this short story collection just did not do it for me. It didn't do anything for me. All right, and then the last book that I have on my worst books of the year list is gonna be this book called It's Me, Charlie. And this is a book that I probably would have never picked up myself, but I actually only read this book because out of my Patreon prompt jar this year, one of the prompts that I pulled out in the month that I read this was to read an extreme horror book. And so I kind of like went around on TikTok. I was kind of looking for something that would intrigue me. And my history with extreme horror has not been great. Like, it's a genre that I really struggle with because I like horror books. Like, don't get me wrong, I freaking love reading horror books, but there's something about the extreme horror genre specifically that it just, I don't know, I feel like I'm a little bit too sensitive. I just can't read stuff like that. Like, it really gets to me. And so I decided to pick up It's Me, Charlie because I was like, oh my god, it's only like 60 pages and, you know, I could just get through it very quickly if it's not something that I'm enjoying. And I do have regrets. I wish that I never read this. This is the only book on this list that I didn't end up rating at all, and it's mostly because I don't think it would be fair for me to rate it because I went into this knowing that this would probably not be the book for me, and it really wasn't. This is not a book that I would recommend unless you want to be absolutely traumatized, but like not in a fun way, more like in a way where you might actually get sick. Like, it's disgusting. And I would want to warn you that if you were considering reading this book, like, there is some very intense sexual violence triggers in this book that are just, you know, like, that's one of my biggest struggles with reading horror books that involve any kind of sexual violence. Like, it is very tough for me to stomach those things, and this book was just graphic to the extremes because, you know, it is extreme horror, which again, it's like, can I really fault this book for these things? I don't know, it's just not for me personally. But also, just to critique the book in general, I was not a fan of the writing in this book. I thought the writing was just not well done, and the ending of this book, it just ended so quickly. It was just like, boop, it was over, and the situation was resolved in such a way that was unrealistic to me. Like, it just ended so fast. So I don't think, even if I was into extreme horror, I don't think I would have liked this one just because I didn't think the writing was very good just in general. But I also, like, oh my god, I have such bad memories with this book. Like, this book made me so nauseous for like days after I read it. Like, I was thinking about this one scene in this book. If you know, you freaking know. I was not happy about it. Like, it was disgusting. Like, I don't ever want to think about this book ever again. Like, and I mean that. It was gross. No thank you. Hard pass for me. Extreme horror is not the genre for me. I will not be dabbling anymore. No thanks. Alright, so those are all of my worst books that I read in the year of 2023. If you've read any of these books, I would love to know what your thoughts are on them, and I would also love to know if you have any, you know, worst books that you've read this year. Please do let me know what they are in the comments. I'm very curious. I would love to know. And also, if you are curious, I have recently posted my most disappointing and my most surprising books of the year, so I will have those linked down below if you missed them. And then very soon, I'm going to be posting my best books of the year, which I'm so excited to post my best books of the year. That's always my favorite video that I look forward to every single year. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon with another one. Bye!